Welcome to Things You Don't Know. When you think of things that have made a huge impact on society, or things that are quite ubiquitous, both trails could lead to one of two different relatively modern inventions. The two things that immediately come to mind are cell phones and television. In this episode, we're going to take what I often tease Dr. Deneen by calling it a dumpster dive. Well, what I mean by that is that we cannot exhaustively cover the topic, but we can clear away some trash or misconceptions, if you will, and highlight some worthwhile nuggets. Find them, dig them out, share them. Without further preamble, let us dive into the topic of television.
The concept of transmitting moving images dates back to the late 19th century, I was surprised to learn. It was a period of very rapid technological advancement where inventors were exploring ways to communicate across distances. The journey started with the invention of the telegraph and then Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, paving the way for visual communication. In the 1870s, a German student named Paul Nipkow invented a rotating disc with the holes arranged in a spiral pattern. This was known as the Nipkow disc. It was the first device capable of breaking down an image into a series of light impulses. Though he lacked the technology to transmit these images electronically, Nipkow's invention laid the groundwork for television.
So, just to clarify here, you say Nipkow invented a rotating disc with holes arranged in a spiral pattern. Hmm. It's not real clear, and the information we had wasn't specific about it. Why the spiral pattern? It almost seems like he was making a kind of something resembling a record of an LP or a 45 or a 78 disc.
I thought that myself. I don't really know why he chose that particular shape, but it obviously worked eventually.
I have a speculation about that particular design implementation probably did influence um, records, you know, going in a spiral like that.
That sounds stands to reason. Yeah.
And just a kind of a thought that occurred. Anyhow, let's fast forward to the early 20th century, and the race to create a working television system was on, big guy. In the 1920s, Scottish inventor John Logie Baird made history by demonstrating the first live moving images in his mechanical television system. He used Nipkow's disc, and in using Nipkow's disc, Baird managed to transmit a simple grayscale image. Now we're talking grayscale like black and white. Nipkow's disc, a pioneering invention in the development of television technology, was a mechanical device designed to scan images line by line. Here's how it worked and how John Baird utilized it. As was said, invented by Paul Nipkow in 1884. Wow, 1884. The disc had a series of spirally arranged holes. When rotated, it broke down images into small segments, enabling the scanning of one line at a time. The spinning disc allowed light from an image to pass through its apertures onto a photodetector. The spinning disc allowed light from an image to pass through its apertures onto a photodetector. Now, each aperture represented a part of the image at a specific time, facilitating the conversion of the visual input into an electrical signal. Baird utilized the Nipkow disk in his early television systems to scan and reconstruct images. He synchronized a transmitter and a receiver, each equipped with a spinning disk, ensuring the scanned light intensity at the transmitting end matched the reconstructed image at the receiving end.
That's amazing.
It, it really is amazing that he would come up with that. It's called creativity. It's not brilliance. It is creativity, which is, I guess, a sort of intelligence, right?
I couldn't agree more. In 1925, Baird demonstrated the transmission of moving images using this technology, marking a significant leap. He transmitted a simple image of a ventriloquist dummy's head, followed by live images of human faces. Now, remember, this device couldn't transmit sound yet, so images would be transmitted on the screen and people would use their radios to get the sound. The combination of Nipkow's scanning mechanism and Baird's ingenuity laid the groundwork for modern electronic television systems. Baird's demonstration of a moving image transmission proved the viability of the concept despite its limited resolution and slow frame rates compared to later technologies.
Yeah, that's true. We could say a lot more about frame rates and that sort of thing, but we're not going to get too much into that. Now, at the same time, in the United States, inventors like Philo Farnsworth were working on electronic solutions. Now, Farnsworth is often credited as the true father of television for developing the first fully electronic TV system in, guess, 1927. 1927. This didn't rely on mechanical parts like Baird's. Farnsworth was a visionary American inventor whose contributions to electronic image manipulation were foundational to the creation of modern television. Now, it was clever and it was a leap. Again, when we talk about these inventions and things, the thing that strikes me most is that it's it's visionary, but I think we use that term in a different way. It is simply getting outside the box and thinking of other solutions. And I think that that's really important to remember uh, for everyone as they go forth in life.
Farnsworth was a farm boy from Utah with a keen interest in science and electronics. At the age of 14, he envisioned an electronic system for transmitting images while plowing a field. He realized that images could be scanned and transmitted in lines similar to furrows in a field. What a unique and wonderful metaphor. Unlike
Creative once again, you know, looking at a field and thinking about the electronics of this and doing it in rows like a field. That's just very creative.
Indeed, all creative thinkers have that gift to look at something ordinary and give it an application that hasn't been thought of before. Unlike mechanical television systems, which relied on spinning discs or on mirrors, Farnsworth conceptualized an electronic method that would eliminate the limitations of mechanical parts. In 1927, Farnsworth invented the image dissector, an electronic device that could convert an optical image into an electrical signal. This was the world's first fully functional all electronic image transmission system.
Bum, ba,
The,
ba.
the image dissector worked by focusing light from an image onto a photosensitive surface. Electrons emitted from the surface were scanned line by line using electromagnetic deflection. And the varying intensity of the emitted electrons was converted into an electrical signal that could be transmitted to recreate the image on a screen.
On September 7th, 1927, Farnsworth successfully transmitted the first fully electronic television image, a simple straight line. By 1928, Farnsworth demonstrated his invention to the press and investors, showcasing its potential for transmitting live images. Now, Farnsworth's electronic approach was superior to mechanical television because and it provided higher image resolution while eliminating the need for moving parts, which increased reliability and scalability.
As is so often the case, Farnsworth innovations led to a series of legal battles with RCA and Vladimir Zworyk, who had developed a similar device called the iconoscope. Farnsworth ultimately won the patent case, securing his place as a key inventor of electronic television. Although Farnsworth's company struggled financially, his work laid the foundation for the development of commercial television technology. Farnsworth's pioneering work in electronic image manipulation is the bedrock of modern television and video technologies. His ideas about scanning and transmitting images electronically are integral to how video is captured, processed, and displayed today. Despite his challenges, Farnsworth is rightly celebrated as the father of electronic television, and his innovations continue to influence digital imaging technologies worldwide. The 1930s saw television slowly transition from experimental technology to a commercially viable medium. Iconic events, such as the broadcast of the 1936 Berlin Olympics in Nazi Germany, showcased its potential to captivate audiences. A brief diversion here. The Nazis had great ideas for television that unfortunately were interrupted by World War II. There's a wonderful film, Television Under the Swastika, that talks about that. After World War II, the production and distribution of TV sets rapidly accelerated in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. The economic recovery and the advent of commercial broadcasting helped make TVs much more affordable. By the early 50s, live broadcasts and the emergence of color television broadened its appeal even more.
The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 was one of the first major global events broadcast to millions, showcasing TV's potential for uniting audiences. Television quickly spread across Europe in the 50s and 60s, driven by technological advancements and state or public service broadcasting models such as the BBC in the UK. How do you like all those letters? By the 1960s and 70s, television was making inroads in developing countries, although infrastructure challenges and economic disparities slowed its expansion. The adoption of TV in Africa and other remote regions lagged due to economic and logistical issues. However, by the 1980s, the proliferation of satellite technology enabled broadcasts to reach these areas also.
Dictatorial and authoritarian regimes were very wary of television's potential to influence public opinion and, heaven forbid, spread dissenting ideas. They viewed TV as a truly double edged sword. In countries like the Soviet Union, mainland China, and others under authoritarian rule, television was heavily censored and used as a tool for propaganda. Some regimes delayed the introduction of television or limited access to content that did not align with state ideologies.
Yeah, as you were saying, for example, early television broadcasts were tightly controlled to promote socialist values in these countries. In Spain, the media, including TV, was censored to suppress dissent during the dictatorship. In North Korea, TV still remains state controlled with limited access to government approved channels. And, you know, we still have a certain amount of controlling, whether directly uh, and legally or by other means in this country and all around the world. There is certainly that aspect of it. But by and large, wow, it's really a conduit for information, isn't it, Sean?
It certainly is. If you want an analysis of the North Koreans' use of TV, read B.R. Myers' masterwork, The Cleanest Race. Now, in the Western world, here's a unique example of a country that was terrified of television, and that's apartheid South Africa. A man called Albert Herzog, who was Minister of Communications, resisted the introduction of what he called clean bioscope, which means little cinema in the Afrikaans language, until the 1970s, because he was terrified TV would undermine the concept of apartheid and, worse than that, promote interracial relationships and race mixing.
And you know what? He was right. And maybe having a new idea, a new influences and impacts was maybe one of the best things about TV, huh?
I think it provided an example of the possibility of a better life. I know people in the Eastern Bloc would watch, when it was allowed in the 70s, American and British programs, and they were envious of how people that were not members of the Politburo lived. But in South Africa, it's a funny story. They have a secret society called the Afrikaner Broederbond, which means brotherhood. And it's very similar to the Freemasons, but ubiquitous in that country. And they're the ones who persuaded the government to introduce TV in the 70s because they felt it could be used. So they segregated channels. Whites watched two channels. People of African descent, Banters, they would call, watched two other channels. Mixed race people had their own channel, and even Indians had their own channel. A crazy example of unnecessary duplication.
Yeah. Governments in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa restricted TV imports and broadcasting to curb the influence of Western culture and ideas. It's interesting, too, the impact that certain kinds of things have had. TV is certainly one. Another one, people often wonder about why Ukraine was so eager to break from the Soviet Union and how that came about. And one of the reasons that it came about was there was an underground where records and other things were circulated amongst the people of the Ukraine. Ergo, they had a slice of life of what was going on and things that we were concerned about, the Western world, we were concerned about. And that undermined their allegiance to communism and all of that sort of thing way before they got their independence. And indeed, that sort of thing is what they're fighting for now in some parts. So, anyhow, TV also fostered a shared cultural experience, connecting people through entertainment, sports, and news. In democratic republics, TV became a platform for political debates and election campaigns. In authoritarian regimes, it was used to maintain control, but underground broadcasts and foreign channels sometimes helped dissidents. Events like the moon landing in 1969, which I can't believe that, Dr. Deneen, there are still people who say, that didn't happen. It was fake.
That doesn't make any sense at all. I know one gentleman insulted astronaut Buzz Aldrin about that a few years ago, and they got into a physical confrontation.
Well, of course. The fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 highlighted TV's ability to document history in real time and unite global audiences. It still remains fascinating to me that people can see things. This is true of eyewitness accounts of anything, but you can see things and then somehow later on say, well, no, that didn't really happen, or it was fake news. It's like uh, people people say that our president elect um, didn't really say we've got to take back the government. I'll go down there. You must take it back by force if necessary, or we will have no government. I've actually heard people say, "Oh, that didn't happen. I watched it. I saw it. I heard it. I hate it." But anyhow, I stray from our topic here.
While dictatorial governments sought to limit TV's potential, technological advancements like cable, satellite TV, and later the internet made it increasingly difficult to restrict access. Over time, television became a universal medium, overcoming resistance and reaching even the most isolated communities. Television's global spread symbolizes the triumph of communication and shared human experience over the barriers of ideology, censorship, and isolation.
As we've said, dictatorial governments were historically wary of television's spread because it threatened their ability to control the flow of information. Unlike traditional media like newspapers or radio, which were easier to regulate, television introduced unique challenges that made it difficult for authoritarian regimes to maintain strict control over the public narratives, at least. TV combined picture and sound, making it a compelling and emotionally engaging medium. Its visual nature could expose citizens to ideas, cultures, and lifestyles that were outside the regime's preferred narrative, as you mentioned previously, Dr. Devine. Live broadcasts of events, especially those showing dissent or unrest, were harder to suppress and could galvanize public opinion. As television technology advanced, signals from other countries became accessible through terrestrial and satellite broadcasts. This meant that citizens in closed regimes could potentially receive uncensored foreign programming.
For example, during the Cold War, Western broadcasts like Radio Free Europe or uncensored satellite channels would reach into Eastern Bloc countries, spreading unpredictable content and contexts. Television, especially when not tightly controlled, would disseminate information that contradicted state propaganda. Regimes feared that news coverage of human rights abuses or corruption might destabilize their authority. Dictatorships often created strict broadcasting guidelines to ensure that TV content aligned with state ideologies. For example, in North Korea, all TV stations are controlled by the state, broadcasting propaganda exclusively supporting the regime.
Yeah. Some governments slowed the rollout of television. In Franco's Spain, during the early years of Franco's rule, TV adoption was limited and content was tightly censored to suppress dissent. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, the governments delayed introducing TV or restricted it to government approved programming to minimize external influence. Governments installed signal jammers or built barriers to block foreign broadcasts. For example, in East Germany, they attempted to suppress Western television broadcasts, not altogether successfully, but they did make their attempts. China uses what they call the Great Firewall to block internet, television, and heavily regulates satellite TV to maintain control.
When regimes couldn't block TV entirely, as we've said, they co opted it as a propaganda tool, using state run channels to broadcast only their approved version of events. For example, the Soviet Union used television to glorify socialism and suppress news and Western freedoms. Nazi Germany, even in the pre TV era, anticipated using television as a propaganda tool to disseminate Adolf Hitler's speeches. Another thing that dictatorships did, rather than having people own televisions in their homes, they would restrict them to public gathering places, bars, youth halls, and so on, that could be more tightly controlled. Despite their efforts to suppress or control it, television often undermined dictatorial regimes of all stripes.
Yeah, indeed. Shows from the Western world, advertisements, and entertainment often conveyed ideas of individualism, freedom, and consumer choice, subtly changing authoritarian values. Events like the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 were broadcast globally, inspiring citizens in other oppressive regimes to demand change. I do remember watching that too. The rise of satellite television and later the internet made it increasingly difficult for regimes to isolate their populations. World War II briefly, to digress for a moment here, briefly stalled its progress. But by the late 1940s, television sets began appearing in American households. The post war era was the golden age of television in some sense, with networks like CBS and NBC and ABC pioneering programming that turned television into a central part of family life. From the black and white broadcasts of the 40s to today's ultra high definition streaming, television has evolved dramatically. Milestones like the advent of color TV in the 50s, the rise of cable in the 80s, and the internet revolution of the 2000s have continuously redefined how we consume content. I remember that we had the first color TV in our little neighborhood, and it was a big set. The screen wasn't particularly large, but the whole thing was rather large, and you would turn it on, and then you had to wait for it to all the things to warm up. But it was amazing. I remember being quite amazed that this was in color. Of course, all the shows were not in color. Today, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a show that is in black and white.
It's very true. Today, as we embrace streaming platforms and smart TVs, we owe a debt to those early pioneers who dared to imagine a world where images could fly through the air and into our living rooms. Now we're going to talk about something else, something that's likely sitting right next to you or even in your hand right now, the cell phone. It's an invention so integral to modern life, it's hard to imagine a world without it. But where did it all start? How did we go from bulky machines that were tethered to desks, having to carry change for payphones, to sleek smartphones we just can't live without? Sit tight, because we're dialing, pun intended, into the fascinating history of the cell phone.
To understand the invention of the cell phone, we need to rewind back to the 19th century and talk about a guy you've definitely heard of, Alexander Graham Bell. He invented the telephone, the landline telephone as we know it today, in 1876, revolutionizing communication. But here's the thing, those early telephones, they weren't mobile, not at all. They were anchored to physical lines. Now, fast forward to the early 20th century, and I know we're leaving out some things here, but we'll get back to that. We see the first sparks of a wireless future. In 1946, Bell Labs introduced the first mobile phone system in the United States. It was called the mobile telephone service. Users could make calls from their cars if they didn't mind the suitcase sized equipment and the whopping $15 a month fee, which was enormous back then. Now, let's jump a little further forward, closer to our time, jump to the early 70s, when a man named Martin Cooper from Motorola forever changed the game. Picture this. It's April the 3rd, 1973, and Cooper is standing on a New York City street corner holding a device that looks like a brick, a very significant size reduction. This was the Motorola Dynatac 8000X. Can you imagine calling a phone that these days? Anyhow, the world's first handheld cell phone. And you know what the best part is? The first ever mobile phone call was made to, who do you think? His rivals at Bell Labs. A little petty, but iconic. I can't blame him. I would have done the same thing.
Me too.
That phone was, by today's standard, massive, 10 inches tall, 2.5 pounds, and with a talk time of 30 minutes. And get this, it took 10 hours to charge, but it worked. And it marked the dawn of the mobile era. In the 1980s, saw cell phones go commercial, but they weren't for everyone. They were mostly status symbols for Wall Street executives and celebrities. Remember those scenes from the movies like Wall Street or Die Hard? Yeah. In the 90s, the cell phone started slimming down and became more affordable.
1996, Motorola gave us the start. TAC, a flip phone that felt futuristic. I knew people that had some of those, and dare I say, even stylish. In 1999, Nicoya's 3310 hit the market. Rugged, reliable, and equipped with Snake. It became one of the best-selling phones ever. If you had one of these, you were certainly cool. Then came the early 2000s, and everything changed. Companies like BlackBerry and Palm introduced devices that blended phones with email and with web browsing. Business professionals loved them. But for the average person, They were still too clunky. And then 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and unveiled the iPhone. It was slick, it was intuitive, and it had a touch screen. Suddenly, the cell phone wasn't just a phone, it was a pocket sized computer.
And after that, the race was on. In 2008, Google launched Android, giving Apple some serious competition. And in the 2010s, apps became the lifeblood of our phones. They turned devices into everything from fitness trackers to gaming consoles. Oh, all of those things. Today's smartphones are more than tools. They're extensions of ourselves with 5G networks, artificial intelligence, and advanced cameras. They've redefined how we work, connect, and create. And the future, well, it's looking even crazier. And maybe crazier is not the right term, but more amazing in many ways. The foldable, the flip phone, it's kind of making a bit of a comeback. Augmented reality and artificial intelligence assistants are becoming standard features. Some experts are even talking about integrating phones with wearable tech or directly wired into our brains. Indeed, the wearable tech is that's already here. You can get a kind of cell phone attachment that looks like a watch and actually talk to people like you do on your cell phone, and it'll do all sorts of other things. Doesn't do all the calculations and everything that a cell phone does at this point, but hey, that's around the corner. So from a 2.5 pound brick in the 1970s to the supercomputers in our pockets today, the evolution of the cell phone is a story of innovation, competition, and human connection. And who knows, maybe the next big leap is happening right now in someone's garage or on a street corner, like Martin Cooper's big thing.
Wow.
And we could go on and on and on. And as we said at the very beginning, it's really impossible in something of this brief nature to cover all of it. But hopefully, we have clarified a few of the factors leading to inventions and whatnot. What I would personally like to encourage our readers to do is think outside of the box. Think how you can connect a field that you're plowing to making a disc and leading to all these unimaginable kinds of things. Think about this for just a moment. If the astronauts that went to the moon in 1969 had the ability to carry a cell phone with them, like if it had been around at that time, they would have had easily quadruple the computing power that they had. It could have, I mean, and the transmission of images and whatnot would have been enhanced. It's just amazing to think of. So I'm encouraging our listeners to not sell yourself short. If you have an idea, work with it a little bit. Think about it. Dream about it. You know, one of our greatest scientists ever, Albert Einstein, and we should do a podcast about this sometime, Dr. Deneen.
We should, absolutely.
How do you think he came up with the general and specific theories of relativity? It came from a dream that he had.
Really?
He dreamed that he was flying through the universe on a beam of light.
That is amazing.
And he didn't tell anybody that's where the idea came from because he knew that they would think he was wackadoodle and would have paid no attention to him. But he allowed that to grow and morph, and then he applied it. You can do that too, folks. Some of you have great ideas. Please don't give up on them. Try. But in the meantime, I guess it's time to bring this topic here, this podcast, to a close. Hope you've enjoyed it and hope that you will join us again real soon. Hey, while you're thinking about it, since I'm reminding you of it now, drop down there, click that bell so you get informed when we have some new content for you. And we would love for you to subscribe. We would love to hear your comments. We'd love to have your likes. Most importantly, come back and see us soon.
Absolutely, folks. This is a once in a lifetime experience. It's a lot of work, but we really enjoy it. And we enjoy hearing from all of you too.
All right, bye for now.
So long.